So let's move on. Without further ado, we're very lucky to have Steve Benford here with us today, Professor of Collaborative Computing in the Mixed Reality Lab at the University of Nottingham. Steve has done some extremely clever things with interfacing and actually making a pictorial representation of that, and he's going to give us an excellent overview at the start of today's discussion session and set the flavour for when we really get into probably some of the more nitty-gritty electronics later on. So I'd like to hand over to Steve. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to talk. Mixed Reality Lab, as it says on the tin, what we're interested in doing is exploring new ways of mixing the digital with the everyday physical world. And there's all sorts of ways of doing that, embedding electronics into things. And actually, most of the talk today won't be about that. I'm not going to spend much time talking about electronics. I'm going to talk about a sort of computer vision approach to doing the same. But actually, really what the talk is about is how, over their lifetimes, everyday things might build up complex records of data, a bit like we do as people, and exploring some of the ways in which that might add to their value and some of the challenges and ways we might go about sharing that among different people. So that's really what the talk's about, coming more from a kind of software or ultimately even a sort of an information model point of view. But look, the way we're going to do it is talk about an object. We'll start with a thing to get our discussion going. Who is this?
That's the bass player.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Can't remember his name. Oaks England.
Yeah.
Guitar player.
You all right? Yeah.
Must be about 75 now.
Very good.
USA.
Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson.
Of course, it's not Willie Nelson, is it? It's Trigger, Willie Nelson's guitar. But thank you. You're bang on the money. This is an extraordinarily.
I said I couldn't remember his name.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It's an extraordinarily valuable guitar. This is Trigger Willie Nelson's guitar, and it clearly carries the marks of a long and battered history. And it's, in spite of its kind of functional state, worth an extremely large amount of money. It's worth a large amount of money because of the stories it can tell, the provenance it has, the history, the things that he's done, who's used it, what was composed on it, where it's played, and so forth. So the question is, how might we bring that kind of value to all sorts of products and everyday objects? That's what I want to explore. We thought we would explore it by making an object, and we thought, well, we might as well make a guitar. Nothing to do with the fact that several of us are very keen guitar players. That's entirely coincidental. So we made our own version of Trigger. This is it. This is called the Carolan guitar. And for a chunk of my talk, I'll tell you about what it does, how we made it, and then I'll draw out some general lessons. But essentially, this is a musical instrument. It's an everyday guitar that carries its digital history with it. You can inspect it whenever it's in your hands, and you can get it to conjure up stories of what it is and where it's been. So this is an exercise in connecting digital material, digital records, to a physical thing in various ways. We'll start though, but we need to talk about the technology. So let's get into the how it does it. How do these things become connected? If you've got a phone, and if you're connected, and if you want to eventually do this for yourself, you need to download an app called Artcodes, from Google Play, an app, what we made. But just in case you haven't got time or don't want to do that, I will try and give a live demo and do a bit of hot switching here, see if it works. Explain what Artcodes is. Bear with me, there's a little bit of seat to the pants, as I'm sure you're aware, about to happen here.
In the best possible tradition.
Yeah. Don't worry, we'll be doing it later. So.
Yeah, that's my phone. Great.
How many emails?
Yeah, quite a few. Let's not talk about that. That's Artcodes under my thumb there. This is Artcodes opened up. Here's some Artcodes things we can do. So I'm going to open up one of these. So this is, I suppose, a shape here that's got 5 white regions that are all joined up. And those regions have got a number of solid blobs within them. And those blobs don't contain anything else. And it's got, if I look at it, it's got 1, 1, 1, 1 and 2 blobs. The order doesn't matter where they are. The shapes don't matter, which is why that is the same as that. It's the same topology. If I drew that, that would no longer count because it's now got a white region within one of the white regions, and that's against the rules that we programmed. If I shaded it in again, it should be black, and it now recognises it because it's solid. So I'm recognising the topology of the image. Okay, it's a nice kind of trick to do. In the see. Okay, fine. So in the hands of a not very great artist, it's still a nice trick to be able to draw your own markers. But what's really nice about this is when you give it to designers. So we worked with a bunch of graduate students at Central St Martin's College in London, trained in visual design. They were trained as ceramic designers, but they did wallpaper design and all sorts of stuff. And it didn't take us long to explain the rules and give them Artcodes, and we sent them off to then do some design work. And here are some of the early patterns they came back with. As a test case, we worked with a restaurant called Basaba in London, and our scenario was designing interactive tableware, crockery, menus, placemats that you might find around a restaurant and that you could scan to trigger different kind of services. So there's a few interesting things to say about this. They came up with some really lovely designs that's very hard to see the topologies in them, and they look like very natural images. There are lots and lots of augmented reality technologies out there. You may have encountered some, Blipar, Google Goggles, String, Euphoria, there's a whole bunch of these, and they're all fantastic. They all do slightly different things. The weird thing about Artcodes, for better or for worse, is very different images can map to the same code, as I just demonstrated. So these all contain several versions of the same code within them. So you could scan those and it would take you to the same information, even though the images have been personalised to look very different. Whereas the ones at the bottom look like the same image, but by varying the number of blobs and then kind of leading your eye astray with different splatter patterns, they actually contain different codes hidden within them. So there's a kind of creative playfulness in this that designers, we found out, really like, that you can kind of play with how the information is, the triggers are visually hidden within the imagery. So that was the technology. And what we've done is applied it to a guitar. So that guitar has got a number of these Artcodes covering its body, so that as you scan different parts of the guitar, it can conjure up different sorts of information for you as an owner or a musician. I could spend hours talking about the making of the guitar, because this was really good fun. There's possibly 2 people in the room who would be interested, maybe more, but not many, so we'll nip over it. First of all, we made some kind of simple codes, or we got our designer, Liz Giel, to design some Celtic knotwork things. I'm just a personal fan of Turlo and Carolan. It's St Patrick's Day, I should have to justify this, an Irish musician, thank you very much. And he was a roving bard who told stories, and it seemed like a really nice theme to have a guitar that would rode around and tell people stories. So we went with a Celtic theme. We worked with a luthier, Nick Perris, from the Newark School of Instrument Making, a traditional guitar builder. He chose the woods, did the design, made the instrument, did lots of hand inlay. Although we ended up, because of the amount of patterning, we hadn't anticipated it would be this crazy at the start. That's weird, nice. We ended up doing quite a lot of laser etching as well, so we kind of had to etch most of the patterns onto the surface and then etch out the dark wood bits, and he would kind of hand finish it and kind of fit them in. Actually led, I won't get too boring. It was a complicated dialogue, I don't know if this would interest you or not, if you're a craftsperson, between the visual designer and the luthier. So if you're putting patterns into an object like a guitar, there are some important rules to follow. You don't want to put much patterning around here. Even this amount of decoration makes most people wince, because this is the sensitive surface of the guitar that makes, it's its voice that makes the sound. It's under huge tension, it's braced underneath. You can't cut holes through the braces, so you have to know where they are, but you have to have enough holes to let the voice of the guitar out. So there was a very long dialogue between the luthier and the graphic designer to come up with this pattern, and they exchanged design files like this back and forward to kind of try and get the right balance. Why is that important? I don't know. It's a bunch of electronics people. Well, I suppose it's about attaching any kind of technology to an object is more than just slamming it in. And in this case, it's more than just slapping the patterns on top of the guitar and thinking the job was done. There's actually a much deeper dialogue about how all of this physical and digital stuff has to sit together functionally and aesthetically. So it's kind of, it led us into this really interesting space where we realised that the digital was affecting the physical and vice versa. And in fact, because of this weird patterning that the luthier went for, he innovated a magnetically removable sound hole on the top of the guitar, which is a really unusual feature. And this is something I think that came out of, again, this dialogue between messing with the digital and the physical. Anyway, I am digressing a bit. So there are 6 points of interaction on this guitar. The headstock, the maker's logo at the top you can scan. The top sound hole, there it is, the bit you can remove. There's a little marker under the strings. You can only scan that one if you take the strings off. You have to have a special relationship to the guitar to get it. Which is an interesting thought about how you interact with everyday objects. What relationship? Are you a maintainer, an owner? Are you just casually picking it up? Do you get inside it? You know, where is the information embedded within an object is an interesting question. Okay, so that's a deliberate choice that there's some information you can only get if you have a particular relationship to the object. The front soundboard has the same code 3 times, the back, the heel. I could do a live scan, a bit like just now, but you can come up and do it yourself afterwards if you put Artcodes on your phone and get some information. You have to believe me, they work in the same way that the piece of paper I showed you worked before. Carolan has a digital record, which is a whole bunch of media in a database somewhere at the university with a public representation that is a blog, a website. So there's kind of a series of 50-odd blog posts. And these have been built up over time, and they capture, in a fairly anally retentive way, pretty much everything we could think about capturing about this object. It was a design exercise in documenting the life of a thing. So we've got the original concept and design sketches, the buying of the wood, loads of photos from the luthier's workshop, a video of Nick playing its first ever song when he's made it. Then it toured around to various performers and venues and so on. So we've got this, as well as the object, in the cloud, in this case rather simply on a website, is this kind of archive, this repository of information. And behind the scenes, not in public view, is even more information and data we've got about what's happened to this thing throughout its life so far. It's about 18 months old at the moment. As researchers, we saw this as a Turing technology probe. Technology probing is a research methodology for human-computer interaction research, where essentially, it's rather obvious, you deploy technologies into people's lives as probes to ask questions and to kind of probe questions. And the question we were after here was, how would people use a digital record? What's its value? How would it be shared? And so releasing the guitar into the world was how we answered the question. So over its lifetime, it spent months in the luthier's workshop being made. It's visited quite a lot of homes, spending 1 or 2 weeks in each, just letting people do whatever they wanted. If you want to borrow it, let me know. It's been involved in some writing sessions. Some professional musicians lived with it for a bit, kind of used it as inspiration for a song that they're now planning on recording. It's played a few gigs, one with a well-known folk musician, Tim Eady, if you've not heard of him. He took it on stage and played it. It's worth it. It's been used in a music lesson. Somebody took it to his teacher and they talked about that. And it did a couple of road trips, went to the States and travelled on the plane and went around in a car. So it's had kind of an interesting life, but it's gone to the sorts of places that you might think a guitar would eventually possibly turn up over its lifetime. And in each of those we've documented, captured data, documented how it was used, got people to make videos, interviews and so on. So we ended up with a kind of wide record of this thing, and it's worth just reflecting on what the nature of the digital record of a physical thing can comprise. So in this case, there's provenance information in there, for sure. So, you know, people are interested in, and we've got lots of stuff that tries to verify that this is the Carolan guitar and tries to verify that it was made sustainably out of the right woods by a certain person at a certain time. And, you know, if you bought it from me, I'm open to offers. I've only had one so far. Then you know, that would be important. People used it to document their personal archive. So some of the players we lent it to, particularly amateurs at home, just recorded everything they knew on it and gave us a video collection. I'm not quite sure why. They didn't seem to intend to want to publish it, but that was just what they did. They kind of used it as this kind of archive of, these are the tunes I know, or practice. It was a source for historical and sometimes fictional stories. It spent time in a guitar shop, and at various other places, people couldn't resist telling us stories about guitars they had owned, sold, bought, had stolen, broken, you name it. Everyone seemed to want to tell us a story about guitars. So it's become a collector of guitar stories. More practically, there's a lot of documentation concerning its use. You might think a guitar is not a very complex object to use. I mean, it's not a computer, it's not full of technical stuff. But there is a bit. There's a pickup inside here, so you have to know where the controls are and stuff. But actually, after the 2 recording sessions we did, one in a bedroom, one in a more professional studio, we ended up adding to its user guide really quite a lot of information about how particular sounds were got. So we said, look, here's a recording, and this was made with these mics in this position and this software and these settings and the EQ, and it used this effect. So if you want to record it and make it sound like this, here's the information you need. So this object now carries a history of, how you could use it in quite some detail to get a particular sound in a sort of professional or amateur situation. And finally, we've got a little bit of data pertaining to well-being. When we took it on its road trip to the States, we put some sensors in it to see what kind of movement stresses it went through, temperature stresses when it was in the hold of an aircraft and various other things. So there's kind of stuff that lets you look back at the object and say, oh, did somebody drop it there? Maybe that's the point at which it sustained some damage. Okay, now we know what happened to it. Or, what do people do when they put your guitar into an aircraft? The answer is they invariably put it upside down as the first thing that they do. They leave it there for several hours. How hot does it get in the car in New Orleans if you leave a guitar in the boot for several hours? The answer is quite hot. And so forth. Okay, I fear I'm rambling. But there are some important, I think, broader lessons for anyone who wants to think about the Internet of Things and how they might connect to our digital data. So here they are. Ownership is a very complex question, even for a guitar. At any one moment in time, I suppose the university owns the guitar, probably, and we in the lab would claim to sort of manifest that ownership. But then when we lent it to people, they were clearly the temporary custodians, and then they would lend it to other people and do things with it. Why does that matter? Well, it's not the ownership of the guitar that matters, it's the ownership of the data that matters. That's what's interesting. The data has got videos that are owned by the musicians who played it, people in the audience who took them. Where does the copyright live in all of this stuff? Where does the value live? So custodianship of the data is a really complicated question that needs a lot of thinking about. Secondly, it turns out there's no one mapping between the 6 points of interaction on the guitar and the digital information you might get if you scan them. You've got 6 opportunities to point a camera at this, and it'll tell you different things. And the mapping is basically the configuration. What does it tell you? Well, ultimately, wherever it went, different mappings were made. The mappings were highly contextual. If it was being used in a performance setting, somebody would make the front point at the list of artists who were playing, so that if it was left on stage, you could kind of scan it, see who they were, and so on. In an open mic, we had it so that whenever I scanned the back, it conjured up a new video that was played on the screen, and we did that in the changeover between artists. Whereas when we gave it to someone to go into their home, if they were an amateur musician, we would, as a courtesy, make the front point at their website or something about them. So everywhere it went, people started making different mappings. There was no universal mapping. Except some parts of those mappings were more or less fixed. So although this isn't a hard rule, the convention that emerged was we never changed the headstock mapping. We always kind of took that as being the provenance certificate. We were loath to update that one. I said, no, when you scan that, that's where you get this is the Carolan guitar made, blah, blah, blah. We ended up with the sound hole being quite fixed, because that felt like the technical how to use it guide. So that one didn't change much. The one under the strings we left as being fairly constant, and this was the kind of detailed technical stuff about where the truss rod is, how to update it, what its maintenance history is, who changed the bridge and all this stuff. But the other 3, the front and the back, And there's a special little hidden kind of Easter egg one just in the cover. Those ones were very fluid. We changed those all of the time. So some parts of the mappings were kind of quite constantly fixed. Other parts changed wherever it went. We ended up making lots of little proxies that you could scan because people, I think, felt disappointed when they'd had the guitar as a physical thing and then all they were left with was a sort of public website. So we ended up making decorated merch, basically. Yeah. So we've got stickers to put on your case, we've got badges to wear, we've got plectrums, and you can keep the sets of those. And somehow those are extensions of the object, you know, through little proxy objects that kind of leave people with a record of it that they can keep and do things. And finally, capturing the record itself was a mixture of automatic and manual stuff. So yes, we did use sensors occasionally. We put accelerometers in the guitar when it travelled and temperature sensors. We put an automated camera, just a little bit of Velcro in there, that would take pictures from inside the guitar and some settings and just did that automatically. But most of the time, the documentation was generated by people. Either deliberately they would record a video or they would tweet and put things on Facebook and we would harvest that. So where the data comes from is both, you know, sensors, but also all the things people say about the object. Right. So we learned a lot. I found that very interesting. We learned a lot of interesting stuff. What we then tried to do is generalise, being computer scientists, a sort of information model is, I suppose, the best thing I can say. Some principles that you might take away and think, well, if I wanted to make an object, not a guitar, that connects to its digital record in interesting ways, how might I think about this? How might I structure it? And our answer is, unfortunately, quite complicated. So, okay, first of all, one of these artifacts or things consists of an object of some kind, a physical manifestation in this case, because we're interested in physical things. Some digital records held somewhere in the cloud in whatever service you want, and a mapping between them. And that much we talked about already in the talk. But then one of the things you have to do is enable people to appropriate that structure and make their own mapping. So when you release this product, dare I call it, into the world, you need to let its owners take some element of control over this mapping. So this is what you might call digital appropriation. Take the physical object and make it point at new stuff, at my stuff. Okay. But equally, what we saw with the proxies was there's actually also a physical appropriation going on. You might also say to people, but you can make proxy objects, the plectrums. And actually, there's one of the guitar's owners was sufficiently excited that he's brought a battered old guitar into the lab and asked us if we would apply the patterns to his guitar, and we're now busy laser etching that, and he at the end will have sort of an object he can map back to this, which raises some interesting questions about what the object is. So our argument is, you know, if you want to be really creative, you need to support people in doing this. You need to give them the ability to change these mappings and make them point at their own stuff, put new stuff in the history. And you need to perhaps give them the designs or the ability to make their own physical artifacts that point at the same thing. And if you remember the bit I said before about saying some of the bits of the mapping were fixed, like the headstock, and some changed a lot. So we made that more concrete by saying that when you publish one of these mappings, you can choose to make the different linkages mutable or immutable. So I can give you an object, say, here it is. It comes with several linkages to digital stuff, and in this mapping, I'm happy for you to change these, but not to change others. The other rule of the game is you should let people recursively make their own mappings. So if you buy an object from me and then you sell it on or give it on, the next person down the chain should get a remap parts of it. So you get chains of mappings. Now, if you are generous enough to make an object with some data and a mapping and let people take it and reappropriate it and do their own stuff, that's very nice of you. What's the value? Well, of course, there may be financial value in that. This is something we should discuss. How would you actually directly monetize it? But there's other kinds of value too. So you might want to get credit. Whenever someone takes one of your mappings and remaps it, perhaps at least our mapping should say who the original was. So if you release an object, imagine I release some musical product into the world, it spreads. And you might harvest data. So imagine that somebody takes my mapping, makes their own, and then starts scanning the guitar with it. Maybe I should get some indication of where that happened and how many scans there were, so I can harvest back all this information. That might be part of the business model, all subject to various negotiations and other frameworks. That's a rather complicated picture, isn't it? But the bottom line is you need to give people the ability to take these physical digital things, make their own mappings, spread them around, but then find some way of harvesting what's going back on. So the object becomes, I suppose, its own sort of social network, its own carrier of information and value. If that sounds a bit abstract, then we've implemented it, so you can try it out for yourself. Let's go back into Artcodes. So here we are in Artcodes. And Artcodes comes with a bunch of different experiences that you can do depending on what physical objects you've got around. These are the recent ones I've done, popular ones that we recommend through our Artcodes online service. Here's my personal library of mappings that I've made and remade and messed around with and made various different versions of them. So let's kind of open one of these. This is a Carolan mapping that I made for an open mic session at a place called Fact. And then I can edit it. So there's some basic info. Here in the actions, these are the links. So let's open that. So the code 11112, I happen to know it's that one, currently goes to the Carolan website, but I can edit this and change the mapping in the app. I can then save the mapping with a new name, which I won't do here. And then when I've done that, I can hopefully share it with my friends. So I can email it to them and send it on, stick it on Facebook, do whatever I want. So if I get an object, imagine it's not a guitar, imagine it's a gift card somebody I pick up in a shop. I can put a little personal message on it and make the back point to, hi mum, happy Mother's Day, blah, blah. Then I can mail that link, or it goes with the card, and then people get the experience on their phone and they can start to play with it. You can also, an extra feature that I think is quite nice is you can mess around with the availability, and I can add times and locations at which this mapping is valid. So I can also publish a mapping for this object and say, but only available in Nottingham on Sunday night between 8 and 12, because that'll be for the gig. And then for people who search or look for recommended mappings at that point, you can say, if you're in Nottingham, hey, go scan the Carolan guitar or whatever. And so, there's more you can do. So, enough of guitars. What other things might it apply to? So at the moment, some of our ongoing projects where we're looking at this idea, not necessarily all to do with Artcodes, we're using other technologies, NFC readers, bits of electronics. The scanning doesn't matter so much as the principles of objects and their records. We're doing a lot of work, this is with Artcodes, about interiors at the moment. We're scanning up Artcodes to wallpapers and fabrics, so we've got designers making a series of wallpapers so you can plaster your house with personalised, scannable, storytelling wallpaper. Why? Good question. Kids' bedrooms, for interactive narratives, keeping records of your decorating projects so that when you go to do something with wallpaper next time, you know what happened. I don't know. Lots of stuff. We're doing a project with Unilever about fast-moving consumer goods, sort of packaging that communicates with appliances, and what data do FMCG packages acquire about you, the customer, and how you're using it, and how does that add value to your experience and indeed Unilever's. And we have a project, it's in collaboration at the moment with the Games Workshop around wargaming miniatures. People invest a huge amount of effort into documenting the lives of wargaming miniatures, from the buying and painting of them to what happens during gameplay and the records they keep the game to blogging about them afterwards. So what happens, and they sometimes get displayed in display cases and they get sold on eBay. So what happens if you bought one of these and it came with its story and its history? Things we've thought about but haven't done anything about, but I think are really challenging. What about more complicated objects? Like cars and houses. So you buy a car, it for sure these days has a long history of data associated with it, manufacturer service records, and increasingly how it's been driven. And lots of stakeholders, custodians are interested in that. Your insurance company want it, so you can get a discount if you're a young driver, so your car logs your driving.
Or the opposite, Steve.
Yeah, or the opposite. Either way, yeah, you may get a discount if you hand your data over to the insurance company. And of course, the critical moment of a car's life is resale. What happens when you resell the car? Who gets to keep the data? Who's bought into its history? Do you hand it all over, lock, stock and barrel? Really? Everywhere you ever drove your car? Do you retain any of the data? Or an interest in the car? Probably not, but a house might be different. You know, if you sell a house, what might you want to know about what happens to it next? I think there's a lot of questions we haven't answered about objects like that really acquire rich and valuable, but also personally sensitive data about what happens as those objects are passed around. Do they have a continual history? Is there a reset and they don't? And I think these are questions to think about. So finally, I'm going to shut up in a minute, but we are going to go back to guitars. We felt at the end of the day that you should be able to conjure up Carolan's history by playing it as well as by scanning it. So we've invented the musical equivalent of Artcodes, which allows you, if you're a musician, to specify a fragment of music to the computer. And then if you can play that back, it will act as a trigger in live performance and it'll bring up information. And a bit like Artcodes, it's not like Shazam in some sense. It doesn't just look at the final rendered form of the output. It looks for the musical structure that you could hide within the code. So you can play the code, depending how good a musician you are, with different levels of improvisation or whatever. So I have a really laughable video, but go on, we'll watch a bit. You'll have to forgive me, it's new work, just coming out of the lab at the moment. I don't know if you're going to hear very well because it's in my laptop. While we're waiting for this to do its thing, these details don't matter too much because you can't even read those from that distance, don't worry. Not a very exciting code, I appreciate. That's me having specified the code in some not particularly useful notation. Here's me playing a second one. And this is what's triggered. So in this case, it triggers a video of me playing the guitar so I can accompany myself, which is quite nice. So I can sit on stage, play an instrument, and it brings up some other stuff. Yeah. Some on stage trigger. Here we are, the Carolan guitar. So there's a really simple chord of G I've specified. And you probably can't read it, but it brings up a little tune book entry so I can tell people what I'm about to play. That's the same code, but I'm playing it in a slightly more musically subtle way with a bit of flourish. But it's the same code hidden within it. And there's various other versions on the keyboard that we've got, and so on. It doesn't matter too much. I guess what kind of appealed to me about this is also thinking about how you make the interactions with things appropriate to those things. So obviously kind of a nice thing about a musical instrument is you want to interact with it by playing it, by making music on it, as well as scanning it. That's it, I think. I'll stop there. Thank you. Hope that wasn't too long.
Okay, thank you very much. Have we got any questions from that fascinating talk? Yes, Eric.
Obviously, it's a bit different to a standard IoT that we, as electronic engineers, talk about. Do you think the difference, just to summarize the difference, is it because it makes a personal connection because of the different type of barcode to the user? The rest is the kind of what already exists, the website, the connection, the things that it does. So is there reason to move away from barcode? Because you can literally have like 5 different barcodes, different places. why didn't you go for the barcode? What's the aim of the project?
Yeah.
What you're trying to achieve, that you're extending out to cars and houses and other things?
Well, I think there are two different challenges I'd make to the Internet of Things as sometimes looks at the moment. So one is there are more ways to connect digital interactions to objects than either sticking electronics in them or decorating their surfaces. So we need to think more holistically about what it means to attach digital stuff. And of course, we're particularly interested in aesthetic decoration. So barcodes are lovely, but unless you want your house covered in barcodes, which some people might, then they're not really going to cut the mustard. So what we need to do is think about, kind of aesthetic technologies that connect digital information to things. Yes, I'm all for putting electronics in things, but they're also very good reasons for decorating things as well. Lots of things in our lives are decorated with aesthetic patterns, almost notably with the exception of this room. But apart from this room, most places are, and people invest a huge amount of effort and craft and skill into making beautiful things.
So it's kind of combining behaviour analysis of the users. So the reason the particular user just points to a particular part of the object, is it because it appeals to them to scan that particular, aesthetically it looks good, or do you think they want to know? Because if it's a barcode, do you think it would put them off to scan the barcode? It has no interest.
Well, it depends on the object, the thing, and the content,
and the people that are going to use it.
It's a design conversation. The conversation is really with the design community who design the aesthetics and form and look and structure of objects. It depends. If you're scanning a tin of beans in the supermarket, you want a barcode or whatever because you want to know where it is, get it quickly, and know what it's going to do. You don't want to spend ages looking at the beans thinking, what do I scan? If you've got a long-lived object, you want it to be aesthetically something that you care about. And for some objects, you want the scanning to be something that you have to learn and is a bit more known. It's part of knowing the object. You know how to interact with it. So there is no one answer. What I would call for is a design conversation, that the people who are putting the tech into things need to talk to people who design things. The second part of the long-winded answer is the data story. So it's this question. We all face the Internet of Things. As soon as you start slapping electronics into, or in some sense onto things, then you're generating data, and you've got this question about how is it shared and managed. And you have opportunity. You have opportunity to add value to those things. So you have business models, if you think creatively, that use this data, but you've also got risk, privacy issues, and or legal issues, and all of those things. So that's a conversation that needs to be resolved as well. That's a very long answer. So.
But have you done this project to try and illustrate those things, or are you planning to take it, more towards some sort of product or something? The project's a technology probe. It's to illustrate and explore the questions. Okay, so it's to send an object out into the world in order to learn and to have a design conversation with the world. So it's not like a psychological experiment. It's a design experiment. One way of designing things is to make things and have a conversation with people. Right. Now, if anyone does want to make a family of guitars, then all we need is a celebrity to endorse and own the guitar number one. We'll make about 500 more. They'll all be connected to one another. We'll sell them for 10 grand a piece, and if you want to put the money in, I'm up for it.
Tim?
Yeah. That was a decent pitch. Can you tell me how robust the Artcodes are, and are they really going to be unique? So could you end up with a situation whereby you've got your guitar which has got its own Facebook page, effectively, and you scan it, and then suddenly you find you've got a pea shooter in Wyoming or something?
Artcodes are not unique. They're only unique when you look at them through an experience. So that's the fun of them. That's why they're not QR codes. If you want something that uniquely goes from this visual design to this one and it can't be remapped and played around with, then this wouldn't do it. This is a technology where people can draw their own version of the Carolan guitar. Now you know what the codes are. You can go home, you can say to the kids or whatever, hey, look, I can draw this guitar thing and scan it, and look, I can go to this history. And that's the creative space that these live in. I wouldn't offer them as a... That's why,
Have you got any idea of what sort of domain they do have? Any uniqueness?
So I think it is about creative design, crafting of kind of personalised things that, you want to tell stories. So publishing designs, people making lots of gift cards. We've worked quite a lot with people in craft shops who've done kind of gifting sessions, those sorts of things. Would be kind of one example. But yeah, they're different again. Essentially,
I'm just thinking from the perspective.
Yeah.
If this, just eggs off a little bit, and quite a few people are interested in doing it, you may be scanning things and not getting the things that you'd be hoping to get.
So I kind of turn the question around a bit and say, if you, for a minute, didn't think about Artcodes, but just thought about scanning using any technology, then what's really interesting is the app is a mediating service that says, load up an experience, do some kind of scanning, and we will take you somewhere interesting. And actually, I think that's an interesting market for stuff, is to control how people make and share any sorts of scanning experiences. So you maybe don't always want a QR code to go to the same thing. Actually, what you want to do is be able to scan an object and give people a contextual, meaningful experience in that moment. And the people who own the business of controlling and sharing these things, I think, are in business. So again, sometimes, you do want QR code always goes to the same website, nobody can get in the way. But actually, I think interacting with things is more about who designs the experience and how is that shared and sold and reused. I think that's the question.
So is this about you sharing codes with other people, like your family and friends, using this so when they scan a picture in your house, it still takes them to the same experience point?
I think it's about you sharing and making experiences. So I go into a gift card shop in Nottingham. The card's got several codes. It's got one on the back that always goes to the provenance of the gift maker. So that's their kind of reward that says, this was made by Betty so-and-so. You want more cards, go and order them here. But there's a couple, one on the front that you can attach to a nice piece of media, like a musical track that will play. And there's one on the inside you can attach to your personal message to whoever you're giving the card to. There's a nice interface that makes it easy. You can give the card to someone else. They can reuse it next Christmas and send it back to you with a different message on it. And so it kind of passes around. So again, it's the control over, that's why we want these multiple points of mapping. The kind of point is, it's a proposition between the different owners. The person who made the card attaches some information, but the person who bought the card then attaches, and the person who ultimately does something else with it.
But the code that goes with who's made it is the one that can't be changed.
Unless it's a recursive thing, unless I buy it, okay, I can't change the code on the back, but I set it so you can't change the message in the middle and I give it to you. But, these are all design questions we need to think about. How it flows, because in any business model or value chain, there are multiple people who are adding layers of information that might want to control how it flows.
Does your geographic location play a part in the mapping as well? So you could scan the same picture in two different parts of the world and go to a different link?
Yeah, and at the moment it's a recommendation thing. It'll tell you what mappings are here, so it'll recommend you might want to do this. What it really should do, and doesn't yet, is you should be able to check in the object. So actually, it shouldn't be based on where geographically you are. It should be based on how close to this thing you are. So really, when you scan an object, it should check in its location, and then everyone else would get hey, there's a thing here you can interact with.
Oh, cool, yeah.
So I think that's the way probably location should work.
I was thinking about the uniqueness, because you could have something which looks the same or different that maps the same thing, but of course you make it unique by the fact that the two things aren't in the same place. So.
Yeah. And so I think uniqueness is important in some. I'm not arguing that there shouldn't be unique codes in the world, but I don't think it's the only game in town in a world where we exchange things and make them do different things and pass them on.
Distraction is being particularly limiting without having essential uniqueness, in that it really restricts its potential, really, in my mind.
Yeah, and I think if that was important, you would use another unique technology alongside the other ones. You would put it.
The artwork. I mean, that'd be personalised and particularly attractive.
Yeah.
So if you can actually develop that to actually achieve uniqueness, without throwing out the artwork.
Yeah.
I think it would be really quite good.
Entirely more to augmented reality, where you don't want to see QR codes everywhere. It just looks normal until you have some access in technology, which Google Glass or whatever the latest thing is, but all of a sudden you've got access to this wealth of information.
Could it be that the QR code used as the absolute reference point, and then you can now start going around the whole place with your Artcodes and you're getting a reference to all the way through? So you've got a fixed thing from QR, which is, say, this is, and then you go around and say the restaurant or something else, and you start clicking on that picture, and it suddenly says roast beef on discount.
Well, I guess if you're registering like Facebook, like you arrive at the harvester and say, I've arrived at the harvester, then
Yeah, that's right.
I think it's a fundamental tension in AR, between taking a unique address and making it look visual to preserve uniqueness versus recognising natural aesthetic features of the world, which may be, in this case, hand-drawn, or it may be a approach like Vuforia or Blipar, where you kind of recognise natural images. I don't know if you've seen any of those kind of AR techniques, but they still got the same problem of non-uniqueness. I can reproduce that natural image by taking a photo of it, putting it on the wall, whatever. So I think there's a very fundamental tension in those, and it may I have to decide which you want, or maybe you have to combine them both. As somebody says, you have to have some kind of code that is unique and really says, no, this is this object. Maybe it's a piece of electronics embedded into it or whatever.
Is there a measure of uniqueness? That's your world, where I'm just thinking there should be.
Uniqueness within a
Well,
context.
a measure of uniqueness, obviously something that's unique is unique, but at the other end is that, if you've got two like objects, very similar but slightly different, somewhere you've got a scale between that, so if you can get your Artcodes shifted up that scale effectively, then that would be good enough. But if you've got something where you scan it once and try something else and scan it again, it needs to be sort of different, it comes up the same thing.
So there's, how big is the code space is one question. How many codes can you have? With Artcodes you can have more complicated codes than just 5 region structures, so you can get up to relatively large numbers by saying, I'll have an 8, 9, 10 region code. But that still doesn't necessarily solve the problem of uniqueness. That's about who controls the code space and allocates those codes, and how secure is that. And the thing about QR codes is that they are different, because they start with a unique address and they produce a visual image from that, and that's why they don't look great. But on the other hand, that is their property. So that they have it's a different philosophy, really. So it was disingenuous of me at the beginning to even suggest they would like QR codes, because they're not really the same thing, only in the sense you scan them.
Steve, I think we'll stop there, but I'm sure we're going to have plenty of time for discussion later. We should have lots of time, and I'm sure it was absolutely fascinating. So I've certainly got quite a few thoughts myself, and I'm sure all of us have. Please thank Professor Steve Benford.